Hello, everyone. This is Ron Giesick from box number 7. I know. It's been a minute, and it's no need to rehash the obvious here, and hopefully I'll be back in the game here regularly, or at least that's my intent. A lot has been happening on my end, however, and since the last podcast, I started doing something I was not planning to do in the immediate future, and that was write a book. No, it's not a novel. I tried that in 2020 and wrote a mediocre amalgam of every boyhood bit of Fantasia I ever loved and made it my own and gave it to a few people to critique, and most of them gaslit me into thinking it was the greatest thing in the world, and one person actually took the time to find all the plot holes and hand them back to me, and I just said, okay, I think I'm good. Anyway, it's actually historical nonfiction this time, and even better, true crime, and it involves someone that not only should break the ratings on a Netflix biopic, but has only had the surface scratched in any literary sense whatsoever. I'll go more into that later, as my current word count of 23,000 words gets closer to a roughly targeted 50,000 or so. But I swerved into this amazing, fatiguing, and atrocious story while researching something I have covered at 2 different levels here, and will broach here slightly today, the Ruggles brothers. Only today we'll talk about the micro as opposed to the macro, if that makes sense. I'll explain that in a minute on box number 7. So many years ago, I was reading a book about writing. I don't remember the name of it, but I know 2 things. One, I lent it to someone 30 years ago who went on to lose it and can't remember the name of it either. And the cover had some kind of yellow notepad sort of feel to it. But in that book was one of the greatest bits of advice I ever read, considering dealing with writer's block. And it had to do with describing a brick. If I remember right, they gave it like a title, as if this was some sort of philosophical writing, old hoary chestnut, as they call it. But I had never heard of it before or really since. But the idea is this, that the writer, presumably too overwhelmed to begin a book, a novel especially, that the worker is tasked with simply trying to describe a small town. Pretty common to want to give the setting of where your story is taking place, and simply trying to describe something without starting with the classic, "It was a dark and stormy night," which is almost a cynical sort of place, even though that begins one of the greatest books of all time. But to give your story the essential vibe to the reader, and this can be really, really overwhelming, as the "where do I begin" conundrum is nearly immediate the minute you sit down to write something. So the advice was to focus on in this example, a single brick on a building, perhaps a bug crawling on that brick, and describe the texture of the brick, and then start panning out from there and discussing the building that it's attached to, perhaps. It's a great aid to the novelist, but I also realized something in regards to my own personal fatigue with things like even doing a podcast. Now, I'm not going to make all kinds of hay or excuses of why I haven't posted since December. But I can easily attribute a few things to it, like holiday madness was one thing, home repairs, working steadfastly on a book I hope excites readers as much as it does me, at least in the research and writing process so far. I do realize that the task is going to be daunting when it comes to footnotes and indexing. But another issue with me is my own zero-sum limitations. I don't have a crew to hook me up with interviews or make commercials or pull in basic research models or anything. I truly am doing this by myself. If I ever achieve ninjas or butterflies or Joe Rogan status, I'll be more than happy to accommodate a crew, but I can't do it. And with that, I do have the ability to do a relatively complex deep dive into a subject, the Ruggles brothers being one that I did, and while it wasn't even an hour-long episode, I felt like it contains more fact than any other presentation about that subject so far that I've ever heard, and I am proud of that fact. But can I keep that up on a weekly basis? Certainly not with my scope of my responsibilities that I carry peripherally on the outside of all this. I have made a whopping 40 cents for my commercial so far that I added to the show, so unfortunately, my day job still holds sway. So why do I bring up this brick thing? Because the brick is no less boring. I realized I can just as well do a microcosmic part of a story. One of the examples that I actually did goes back to, and this is why I mentioned the Ruggles brothers' fascination. I am proud of my little episode covering the original burial site, lost to the shelves of records, and it just simply needed a nudge back into the sunlight. And while I didn't discover Cortez's lost gold or anything, I still discovered and revealed a golden fact, and I didn't need to go into the entire Ruggles brothers' sordid history in order to tell that really great story. It does have an inertia and an energy all by itself. In fact, I recently visited the actual site now that I had discovered it, which is now an orchard in Tulare County, and I was granted permission to go out to the spot by the owner, which for me was standing in a really stringent moment of California history. Even though it was rather pedestrian in feel, it is just nothing but an empty orchard, and there was not another soul anywhere on that corner of the acreage. But I did manage to stand on a ground where a pair of cursed brothers were buried in shame and made an incredibly infamous mark on California history. But the point here is, sometimes it's cool to tell the entire saga of a Lincoln assassination. But you know what else is interesting? What was in his wallet the night he was killed? A small but captivating episode that is waiting, and believe it or not, the knowledge and material for a podcast like that is actually out there. And of course, I'm on it. Eventually here. But I said all this to thank you for tolerating my adjustments, tweaks, nudges, retcons, adjustments, backpedals, remakes, calibrations, and I guess I'll say adjustments again for the third time. And yet, from time to time, I'll have some complex shows. Especially the one I've hinted at a few minutes ago. I will certainly do a show about it, but by the time I'm done, you're hopefully going to want to buy the book because it's going to chronicle the life and atrocities of a woman that not only lived and breathed during the times of Lizzie Borden and Belle Gunness, but should possibly sit amongst them as part of a triumvirate of evil. I'll get into that later, and we'll see you at the next episode. This is Ron signing off from box number 7.